She went on air like any other TV host. Everyone laughed at how she spoke and carried herself. But when a Korean Mafia boss walked into the studio, let's go back a week. Enjoy. The light around the dressing room mirror is too bright, almost merciless. It captures every detail. Ifaya uses a soft brush to blend a thin layer of foundation under her eyes. There are light, almost purple shadows there, marks of 3 sleepless nights and a constant background tension. Makeup isn't beauty, it's camouflage. It's the final and most important layer of her work uniform. Each stroke of the brush is a stroke, concealing real fatigue, painting over disappointment. She applies a long-lasting lipstick in a smooth, professional shade. Nothing bright, nothing provocative, only flawlessness. She looks at her reflection, a woman in a perfect jacket the color of a deep night. On the thin fabric is a subtle geometric pattern, inspired by her grandmother's traditional textiles. It is her quiet, personal protest. The only detail that belongs exclusively to her in this impersonal studio space. She stands and straightens her shoulders. Posture must be impeccable. A straight back is not only elegant, it is a wall between her and everything happening outside the frame. The earpiece hisses softly in her ear. Ifia, come out in a minute. Get ready. The director's voice is dry, without greeting. Not good luck, not don't worry. Simply a statement of fact. She silently touches her hand. A gesture meaning understood. She takes the clipboard with the questions. Her fingers are cold. She takes one last deep breath. Inhale, and it appears on her face. A false smile. The muscles of her cheeks gently tighten. Her lips form a familiar, open shape. Her eyes must shine. She makes them shine. She has been practicing for a long time in front of the mirror. Now it happens automatically. The smile is her shield. She leaves the dressing room and enters the noise of the studio. The studio is immersed in semi-darkness. The main light captures only her and her guest. Everything else is shrouded in shadow. She takes her seat in the center. In front of her is this main camera, its black lens like an unblinking eye. As the opening theme plays, she glances down at her tablet, pretending to scan the questions. She knows them by heart, but that gives her an excuse not to look into the darkness. It's from this darkness that voices emerge. At first, just an indistinct whisper somewhere to the right, behind the equipment stand. Then the words become slightly clearer, cutting through the opening music. That jacket again. A bit too theatrical, don't you think? A familiar female voice, the voice of one of the assistant directors. A man chuckled in response. He thinks it's haute couture, but it looks like a tablecloth from an ethnic cafe. Another stifled laugh. Ifia doesn't move. She slowly moves her gaze to the next question on the tablet. The letters swim slightly before her eyes. She concentrates on her breathing. Inhale, exhale. The shield of a smile is not yet on. Her face is neutral for now. She allows herself this luxury, to be simply herself for a few seconds, the one being offended. And the way she speaks, so carefully like a robot, not a single lively intonation. The female voice continues. Ifia's fingers curl beneath the table, unnoticeably clenching. Her nails dig into her palms. This pain is real, and it helps. It pushes away the warmth that rises in her eyes. She won't cry. Never. She lifts her head and looks directly into the camera lens. Her face becomes a smooth, impassive mask again. The whispers in the darkness fade, sensing her gaze. But the tension, like a thick electric charge, lingers in the air. They are here. They are always here. The red light on the camera flashes. The music fades. Ifia turns to the guest in the first block, a large, red-faced businessman named Markov. He's slumped in a chair, his expensive jacket straining at the buttons. Mr. Markov, good evening. Let's start with your new project in the port area. Critics are citing environmental risks. How do you respond to these accusations? Her voice sounds clear, smooth, and professional in the studio. Every word is like a polished crystal. She looks at the guest, demonstrating her engagement. Markov lets out a short, hoarse sound, like a laugh. He doesn't even turn his head fully toward her. His gaze glides over her, as if she were an empty space, then strays off to the side, beyond the cameras, to where the program's producer stands in the shadows. Environmental risks, he begins, clearly addressing the producer. You know, these are competitors' speculations. Any progress has its price. He speaks loudly, confidently, gesturing, but his eyes and his entire body are turned not toward Ifia, but 30 degrees to the side. He's talking to the producer, to an imaginary audience, to anyone but the woman who asked the question. For him, she's not an interlocutor. She's a microphone on a stem, a function, an appendage to the studio. Ifia nods, looking at him. Her insides tightened into a tight, cold knot. She heard someone in the darkness snort again. She continues. But specific studies point to possible groundwater contamination. What are you doing to minimize it? Markov finally casts a quick, cursory glance at her, a look down at her. Darling, he says, and the word feels like a slap on the cheek. We employ the best engineers. It's not your place, excuse me, to interfere. Your job is to speak beautifully into the camera. He turns away again. Ifia freezes for a split second. Her shield cracks. She feels a shiver of humiliation and rage run down her spine. But the camera rolls. The red eye doesn't blink. She takes another breath. Her smile, that same fake smile, returns. It becomes even more inscrutable. I understand, she says, her voice still calm, though inside she's burning. Then let's talk about the economic benefits of the project for the city. She continues. She does her job perfectly. But deep down, she feels like a ghost, invisible in her own ether. The first part of the broadcast is over. The red light on the camera goes out. Ifia leans back in her chair, allowing her face to relax for a moment. Her smile fades, revealing fatigue. Markov, without a word of farewell, is already standing and heading out, clapping the producer on the shoulder. Ifia picks up a bottle of water from the table and takes a small sip. Her throat is dry. At that moment, the director, Leo G, quickly approaches her. He usually keeps his distance, but now his face is pale and his eyes darting. He squats down next to her chair to be level with her. His voice is quiet but intense. Ifia, listen carefully. Next block. One guest. No mistakes, do you understand? Not a single one. No misfires, no stupid questions. She looks at him, slowly placing the bottle on the table. Who's the guest? She asks just as quietly. Leo G licks his lips. He looks physically ill. Yoon Byung-ji. Have you heard that name? She shakes her head. No, she didn't hear. But Leo G's face makes it clear. This isn't just an important person. This is something else. Remember, the director whispers, grabbing her elbow with unusual force. This isn't a businessman, not a government official. This is a special situation. You ask only the approved questions, exactly the ones on the clipboard. Don't improvise. Smile. Be extremely polite. He speaks. You listen. He asks a question. You answer briefly and clearly. Your job is to conduct the interview and remain in one piece, and for him to leave satisfied. Everything depends on it. He doesn't specify what everything means, but his grip and the sweat on his forehead speak volumes. Ifia nods slowly. The cold lump inside her, left by Markov, freezes over. Fear, clear, precise fear. Not the fear of embarrassment, but the fear of real consequences. She's never seen Leo G like this. Is he here yet? She asks. He's coming now! Get ready! Leo G stands up and practically runs toward the studio exit, shouting to someone about lights and sound. Ifia takes the new tablet her assistant brings. On the screen is a short list of questions, all very general, very safe. About charity, about her vision for the city's development. Nothing personal, nothing controversial. This isn't an interview. It's a ritual, a survival test. The window in the hallway next to the studio overlooks the service entrance. Equipment vans and staff cars are usually parked there. Ifia stands by the window, formally checking her tablet, but in reality, observing. First, a single black SUV arrives. It's large, polished, and has darkly tinted windows. It stops not at the entrance, but in the middle of the lot, blocking traffic. Two men in matching dark jackets emerge. They don't fuss. They slowly survey the area, their gaze methodically sweeping over rooftops, windows, and other cars. They speak into microphones on their sleeves. Then, two more identical vehicles pull up, silently, at low speed. Another man gets out of the second one and opens the back door of the third SUV. A man emerges from it. He's short, wearing a perfectly tailored dark gray coat. His movements are economical and precise. He doesn't look back. He simply begins walking toward the entrance, and his men instantly take up positions around him, one in front, two flanking him behind. They move as one, without unnecessary words, without fuss. Ifia notices two details. First, none of the cars have license plates. Second, the man in the coat, when he turns for a second, illuminated by the streetlight, is completely calm. There is no tension, no arrogance. There is only complete, chilling confidence. This is the confidence of a man for whom all doors are already open, and all rules have long been rewritten. She steps away from the window. Her breath catches. An unusual silence reigns in the studio. Everyone seems frozen in their seats. Then from the hallway comes the sound of rapid, nervous footsteps. Park Ho-chi, the TV channel's CEO, runs into the studio. Ifia has seen him maybe 4 times in her entire tenure, always at corporate events, always the center of attention, surrounded by sycophants. Now his face is flushed, he's breathing heavily, and his expensive tie hangs crookedly around his neck. His gaze darts around the studio. Where? Where is he? Is everything ready? Lights? Sound? Leo G. Where's the mic for the gentleman? His voice breaks into a shrill note. E, carrying a folder, scurries behind him like a shadow, trying to say something. Paco, maybe we should meet you at the elevator. Shut up! The director hisses and rushes to the exit. Everyone in your places! Smile. No nonsense! All his panic, all this pitiful, fussy terror, it's the complete opposite of the icy calm Ifia saw by the window. And that's what's most frightening. If the man who, for her, represents the pinnacle of power on the canal is behaving like this, then who is this guest? A minute later, a group appears at the door. 2 guards enter first. Their eyes quickly scan the room. They notice every camera, every person. Their gaze glides over Ifia, a quick, non-judgmental fixation. Then they step aside. And he comes in. Yoon Bum-ji. He takes his time. He removes his gloves without looking at them, and one of his men immediately takes them. He takes off his coat too, revealing a dark, impeccable suit underneath. No flashy ties, no flashy accessories, just quality and understatement. Park Ho, bending over in a respectful bow, mumbles something, extending his hand to Yoon Bum-ji, stares at the outstretched hand for a second, then lightly touches it with his fingertips. It's not even a handshake, it's a sign that contact has been granted. The channel director beams with happiness. Then the guest's gaze breaks away from him and slowly circles the studio. It passes over the lighting fixtures, the cameras, the faces of the frozen technicians. His eyes are cold, attentive, devoid of any curiosity. It's the gaze of an evaluator, the gaze of someone accustomed to seeing not people, but functions, assets, obstacles, or tools. And this gaze stops on Ifia. She stands by her chair, holding her tablet. She feels that gaze wash over her. It doesn't glide over her like Markov's. It studies her, from her perfectly coiffed hair to the tips of her shoes. It lingers on her face, on her eyes, which she hopes don't betray fear. He sees the jacket, the one with the quiet pattern. His gaze lingers there for a second. There's no mockery in that look, no disdain. There's a cold, impersonal interest in it, as if he were looking at an unfamiliar, but potentially important document. He stares at her for a few seconds. The studio is so quiet, you can hear the hum of a transformer somewhere in the ceiling. Then he nods slightly, a barely perceptible movement of his head. Not to her. It's a signal. To his people, to Leo G, to everyone. A signal that he's ready. And he heads for the empty chair. He passes her, and at that moment, when he's almost level, his eyes meet hers again, just for a split second, and there's nothing in them. No friendliness, no hostility, only pure, weightless power. And understanding that she's now completely in his power. He sits down. Ifia slowly takes her place. Her heart beats somewhere in her throat. The test begins. Yoon Bum-ji takes a chair. His movements are smooth, unhurried. He adjusts the cuff of his shirt without looking at her. He doesn't even seem to notice how the entire studio has changed around him. Before his arrival, there was the familiar hum of work here, the hum of ventilation, the creaking of chairs, whispers, the sound engineer's short commands, chuckles from the darkness. Now none of that is there. The air has become thick and still, as if it had been pumped out. The only sounds are the faint hiss in Ifia's headphones and the distant muffled hum of the city beyond the walls. No one dares move. The camera operator stands frozen, his eyes glued to the viewfinder. The assistants at the stands stare at the floor. Even Leo G, the director, stands behind the camera, holding his breath, his face still ashen. Park Ho, the director, has disappeared, apparently slipped out the door, unable to bear the tension. Yoon's guards. The homeless people stand around the perimeter, in the shadows. They don't look at anyone in particular, but you can feel them watching everything. Their silent presence completes the feeling of complete, absolute control. Ifia sits facing this silence. Her own breathing seems incredibly loud. She's afraid to move her leg, to take an extra breath. The lump of ice in her chest has melted, turning into cold, heavy water that fills her insides. She feels her fingers tremble as they rest on the tablet. She clenches them into a fist under the table. He doesn't look at her. He just sits, letting the silence do its work. This silence is his weapon. It presses on everyone, exposing every weakness. Ifia understands. This is part of the test. The first part, simply to withstand this gaze, this silence, without breaking. The red light on the camera lights up, a soft but distinct sound in the silence. A signal. Ifia feels all eyes, even those invisible in the darkness, glued to her. Now she must speak. In this deathly silence, she looks up from her tablet and glances at her guest. He's already waiting. His gaze is now fixed on her. He's patient, like a predator. Her voice must break free from her constricted throat. She forces it to work. First, just air, then sound. Mr. Yoon, good evening. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Her voice resonates in the studio. It's clear, smooth. To her own surprise, there's no tremor in it. It sounds as professional as ever. Years of training, years of hiding her true feelings, are taking their toll. Her body is running on autopilot. She continues, looking him in the eye. It's difficult. His gaze won't let her hide. Your presence here is a great honor. The first question can't help but be about charity. Your foundation, New Dawn, actively supports children's hospitals. What does this work mean to you personally? She utters a rehearsed, safe question. The words come naturally. Fear still rages within her, but her voice doesn't betray it. It's as if she's observing herself from the outside, seeing herself sitting across from this dangerous man, and hearing her own, all too calm, voice. Yoon Byung-ji doesn't answer right away. He studies her for a few more seconds after she finishes. The pause is interminable. Then he tilts his head slightly. It's not a nod. It's simply a change of angle, as if examining an interesting exhibit under a different light. When he begins to speak, his voice is quiet. But in this silence, every word falls with the weight of a leaden seal. He speaks clearly, without emotional fluctuations. Charity isn't a job. It's an obligation. If you have resources, you must give them back to the system. Otherwise, the system will collapse. And it's impossible to do business in a collapsed system. He speaks, looking only at her. Not at the camera, not off into space. His dark, impenetrable eyes are fixed on her face. He watches her every micro-reaction, the way she listens, the way she breathes. And that's the difference. Markov was looking right through her. This man was looking into her. His attention wasn't just caught. It was absolute, total. He was the master of not just this studio or this city. He was the master of this conversation. He dictated its rules simply by his presence and the way he held her gaze. Children's hospitals are an investment in the future, he continues, his voice still even. A healthy generation means stability, and stability is the only thing that matters in the long term. He doesn't smile. He doesn't try to appear kind or pleasant. He simply states the facts, with cold, merciless logic. And this gaze, this complete control, paradoxically doesn't humiliate her, as Markov did. It's worse and better at the same time. It acknowledges her existence, but as an object. As part of the system he speaks of, he sees her, truly sees her, and that's 1,000 times more terrifying than being invisible. Ifia listens, nodding. Her professional smile is still there, but something shifts inside. The fear is still there, but something else is mixed in with it. A keen, almost painful interest. And understanding. Understanding that she's now playing a game whose rules he writes, and she can't lose. Ifia prepares to ask the next question on her list. Words swirl in her head, and she tries to maintain eye contact with her guest. The deep, unnatural silence still weighs on her ears. It's in this silence that it sounds especially loud. From somewhere on the left side of the studio, behind the monitor stand, comes a long, deliberately loud yawn. Not just a subdued sound of tiredness, but that breathy, groan-like yawn, the kind you clearly do to show boredom. Immediately after, a stifled but distinct chuckle, a familiar chuckle, the same one she'd been hearing all evening. It sounds like a bang in the deathly silence of the temple. Ifia feels her insides clench. She can't see who it is, but she knows it's one of the technicians, the same one who commented on her jacket, the girl who considers her job boring and allows herself such liberties when the guests are not the most important. She clearly doesn't understand who is sitting in the chair right now. Or maybe she does, but the desire to put Ifia in her place is stronger than her fear. Ifia's face didn't move a muscle. Her practiced smile was still there, but inside, everything was breaking. This was a disaster. This was exactly what Leo G had warned about. Stupidity, unprofessionalism. And it wasn't really aimed at the guest, but at her. Public humiliation, a demonstration that her broadcast and her guest were a boring misunderstanding. Yoon Bomji doesn't break his gaze on Afi. He doesn't even bat an eyelash. He seems to simply ignore the sound, like ignoring the bark of a distant dog. But his people don't. The guard standing closest to the source of the sound, the one who entered first, a stocky man with a short haircut and an unmoving face, executes a single fluid movement. He slowly, very slowly, turns his head in the direction from which the yawn came. His movement is completely devoid of fuss, mechanical and precise, like the pan of a security camera. His eyes, empty and shining, find the guilty figure in the gloom. He doesn't frown, doesn't rage. He simply looks, records. His gaze doesn't carry a threat in the usual sense. It carries something worse, a complete, heartless statement of fact, a violation of the peace, a lack of respect. The studio couldn't seem to get any quieter, but it does. The air freezes completely. Ifia sees out of the corner of her eye the technician suddenly sit up straight, covering her mouth with her hand. Her laughter cuts off mid-sentence, turning into a quiet, frightened squeak. Even Leo G behind the camera freezes, his eyes wide. Everyone understands that something irreparable has just happened. The boundary has been crossed. 2-3 seconds of this chilling fixation pass. The guard still watches. It seems he's waiting for a command. Any sign. And the sign comes. Yoon Byomji, without taking his eyes off Effia, raises his right hand. Just a few centimeters from the armrest of the chair. He doesn't look at the guard. He simply makes a light, almost weightless gesture with his index finger. Not toward the technician, but simply downwards. A barely perceptible movement. The guard immediately turns his head back, returning his gaze to a neutral position. He turns back into a statue. The incident, it seemed, was over. But that's not true. The tension in the studio didn't subside. It skyrocketed, transforming into pure, undiluted terror. Because everyone saw the mechanism of power in action. Absolute, silent, deadly. One disrespectful sound, and the guard's gaze, like a crosshair, finds the target. One slight gesture, and the threat is cancelled. For now, Yoon Bomji finally breaks the silence. His voice sounds as calm as if nothing has happened. He addresses Ifia, but his words now ring against a new, terrifying backdrop. You see, he says calmly, discipline. It's the basis of everything. Without it, the system malfunctions. Inappropriate sounds appear. He pauses briefly, letting the words hang in the air. He's not talking about charity. He's talking about what just happened, and he relates it to her situation, directly and ruthlessly. I wonder, he continues, his gaze growing even more penetrating, do these kinds of glitches often happen during your broadcasts? Or is this just a peculiarity of today? He asks her a question, but it's not an interview question. It's a trap. It's a test. Will she confess to the atmosphere around her? Will she complain? Or will she save face, ignoring the direct indication of humiliation? Ifia feels icy shivers run down her spine. The camera's red eye stares unblinkingly at her. Everyone waits for her answer. And in this silence, even breathing is no longer audible. Only the soft, growing roar of her own blood in her ears. Yoon Byomji's question hangs in the air. Do these kinds of glitches happen often? Ifia feels every muscle in her body tense to the limit. She sees two options before her. The first is to lie, make surprised eyes and say something like, "Oh no, what are you saying? That's rare. It's safe. It's what's expected of her." But something inside her, the very part that had made her wear that jacket, rebels against this lie. He'd already seen it all. He'd heard the yawn. He'd understood its meaning. Lying to him would be disrespectful, would mean thinking he was stupid. And that, as she'd just seen, could be more dangerous than the truth. She takes a barely perceptible breath. Her voice, when she speaks, is quieter, but just as clear. It's unapologetically clear. Every live studio has its share of extraneous sounds, she says, looking directly at him. Equipment noise, the occasional creaking sound, but the ones that carry a certain coloration usually fade away when there's a person in the frame who demands your undivided attention. She doesn't complain. She doesn't point fingers. She simply states a fact, couched in professional jargon. She acknowledges his power, requires his undivided attention, without demeaning herself. It's a delicate balance. Yoon Bomji is silent for a second. Then the corner of his mouth lifts a millimeter. It's not a smile, more like the shadow of a thought. You answered without answering, he remarks. An interesting skill, one shared by many public figures, but I'm more interested in something else. Your personal opinion. You mentioned the system's obligation. Do you believe that charity is merely a cold calculation of stability, or should there be room for something else? For example, for simple human compassion? He asks her a question, not to the TV presenter reading from her tablet, to her personally. For the first time in her career, a guest, especially one like this, has turned the conversation to her own thoughts. It's so unexpected that she's momentarily taken aback. He's not asking about his foundation's facts. He's asking about her philosophy. This is a trap of a new level, or a test of a different kind. Ifia's head. She puts the tablet aside. It won't help her now. She looks into those impenetrable eyes, searching for a clue, but finds only anticipation. Calculation and compassion are not mutually exclusive. She begins slowly, choosing her words carefully. Cold calculation without a human dimension leads to cynicism, and compassion alone without a systemic approach often leads to chaos and a waste of energy. The most stable system, in my opinion, is one in which calculation serves as the skeleton and compassion as the blood. It's what makes this system live for people, and not simply exist for its own sake. She says this almost without a breath. The words are born from deep within, from her own long-cherished thoughts she's never spoken about on air. She doesn't use complex terms. She speaks simply, but firmly. Yoon Byung-ji doesn't interrupt. He listens. He truly listens. His gaze no longer scans her as an object. He follows the train of her thoughts. When she finishes, a tiny spark flares in his eyes, in that same impenetrable depth, and then fades. A spark of lively, genuine interest, almost approval. Blood and bones. He repeats her words without intonation. A vivid image. Surprisingly, practical. Most in your profession prefer to talk about kind hearts and mission. You talk about a viable system. It's more honest. He's not praising her. He's making a statement. But in this statement lies an acknowledgement of her as a thinking being. He's engaging in a dialogue with her, as an equal, albeit one in an incomparable position of power. Everyone in the studio seems to have understood this. The silence now has a different quality, not oppressive but focused. Yoon Byung-ji begins to elaborate, returning to the topic of foundations. His speech remains measured and precise. Ifia listens, nodding, but part of her attention now automatically scans the space behind the cameras. She feels more than just his gaze on her, and she sees it. In the darkened area, behind the cameraman, a familiar face flickers. Her department head, Minho. His face is contorted with silent panic. He catches her gaze and begins gesturing frantically. He points a finger at his mouth, then spreads his hands out to the sides, as if demonstrating something simple and empty. Then he presses his palms together in a prayer gesture and shakes them. The message is clear as day. Keep it simple. Don't be clever. Don't get philosophical. Return to the approved questions. His movements are almost comical in their desperation. He's afraid she'll take the conversation into dangerous depths, provoke the guest. He sees this dialogue, and for him, it's a red alert. Ifia looks away from Minhua and back to her guest. Two feelings war within her. Fear of disobeying her superiors, of making a mistake, of incurring wrath. And a new, fragile, yet burning feeling. Excitement. The feeling that she's finally speaking to more than just empty words. That her words carry weight. That she's being listened to. Truly. Yoon Byung-ji finishes his answer. He looks at her, waiting for the next question. In Ifia's earpiece, Leo G's quiet, hysterical whisper. Ifia! The next question on the list. Item 6. Only item 6. She looks at the tablet. Item 6. What are your foundation's plans for next year? Safe, boring, predictable. Then her gaze falls on her own handwritten notes in the margins. The question she'd composed herself while studying, and which Leo G had crossed out with a red line. The question that breaks all the rules. The question that, right now, Minho, sitting at the counter, is probably ready to faint. She looks up and meets Yoon's gaze. Byung-ji. There's no anticipation of a specific question in his eyes. There's anticipation of a continuation of the dialogue they've just begun. Ifia throws her shoulders back. She pushes the tablet further away. She no longer looks at Minhua, at Leo G. She looks only at him. You spoke about the system's resilience, Mr. Yoon, she begins, her voice firmer than ever. But any system, especially a private and influential one, exists within a legal framework. This is a question that concerns many. How do you ensure transparency in the operations of your structures to avoid misunderstandings with government regulators? How do you establish these boundaries? Someone in the studio gasps softly. Minho covers his face with his hands off camera. Leo G lets out a helpless groan in his earpiece. She asked directly about how a man of his reputation interacts with the law. She cut to the chase. She crossed a red line. Ifia doesn't look away. Her heart is pounding like a hammer, but the fear is now mixed with something cleansing. With a sense of freedom, she finally asked not the question expected of her, but the one she felt was necessary. There will be consequences, but in this moment, she feels real, for the first time in years. Ifia's words hang in the air. They don't just hang, they glow red hot, searing the silence. Transparency, boundaries with regulators. Each of these words is a minefield. Each one directly points to that very fine, invisible line that everyone knows, but is never spoken about out loud on air. Especially not with a person like that. Even the lighting in the studio seemed to have become harsher, more merciless. Ifia saw one of the guards' jaw tense slightly. It was the slightest movement, but in the complete stillness of everything else, it seemed like an explosion. No one stirred at the operator desks. The technician, who had been yawning, now pressed himself against the monitor, his eyes wide and filled with horror. Minho, the department head, no longer gestured. He simply stood there, his face sallow. He looked at Ifia as if she had just signed her own death warrant. Leo G isn't making a sound in the earpiece. It's completely silent. It seems he's disconnected, unable to listen any further. Ifia feels her own heart pounding somewhere in her temples, heavy and thunderous. A lump in her throat makes it hard to breathe. She's done it. She's crossed the line beyond approved scripts and the protection of superiors. Now everything depends only on him, on the man sitting across from her. Yoon Byung-ji doesn't answer. He sits completely still. His hands rest on the armrests of the chair, his fingers relaxed. His face is a stony mask. No surprise, no anger, not even a hint of annoyance. He looks at Ifia, but it's no longer the gaze of an equal interlocutor, nor the gaze of a master of the situation. It's a third new look, deep, penetrating. He studies her as if trying to discern not her words, but the very mechanism that produced them. Does he see fear behind her professional mask? Does he see the challenge hidden behind the wording of her question? Or does he see mere stupidity? This pause lasts an eternity. The seconds stretch out, becoming viscous and heavy. In the studio, you can hear the floorboards creak under someone's foot, making an involuntary movement. Ifia doesn't look away. She knows that to look away now would be to surrender, to acknowledge her fear. She holds it. Her palms are wet under the table, but her face maintains a neutral, attentive expression. Finally, he blinks slowly, once, twice, and begins to speak. His voice hasn't changed. It's still even, calm, and lacking inflections. Boundaries, he says the word, as if tasting it. It's interesting that you use that word. Not laws, not rules, boundaries. It suggests some ambiguity, a line that can be seen in different ways. He takes a micropause to let that statement sink in. Transparency is a nice word for the public, for reports. Reality is more complex. Any serious structure, whether public or private, exists in two dimensions. There's the external facade, rules, documents, declarations, and then there's the internal mechanics, trust, agreements, mutual understanding. The former is for everyone. The latter is for those inside the system. Trying to make the internal mechanics completely transparent is like trying to make a car's engine transparent while still driving it. It's distracting, interferes with work, and ultimately, harmful. The goal isn't to demonstrate the mechanics, but to ensure that the car is driving on the right road and doesn't veer off the road, and that everyone in it feels safe. He says this directly, without illusion or allegory. He doesn't deny the existence of inner mechanics. He simply states it as a fact, as an axiom, and there's no challenge or threat in his tone. There's cold iron logic, the logic of a man who doesn't make excuses because he doesn't see the need. He describes the world as he sees it. He falls silent, but his gaze remains fixed on Ifia. He waits for her reaction, waits to see if she understands what he's said. Ifia digests his words. The outer facade and the inner mechanics. The car and the engine. It's frankness, but a frankness of a different order. He's not revealing secrets. He's revealing a principle. And he does so because her question was so precise that it required not an evasive answer, but an explanation of the rules of the game. Your question isn't about what we show. he continues, and for the first time, a barely perceptible thread of something resembling respect for her intellect appears in his voice. It's about how we draw the line between the show and the real. That's not a question for a journalist reading a script. That's a question for a strategist, a rare quality, especially here. He doesn't say at your place. He says here, making a slight gesture that encompasses the entire studio, this entire world of superficial broadcasts and backstage laughter. This gesture contains both disdain for her surroundings and, paradoxically, recognition of her exceptionalism. It wasn't a compliment to her looks or charm. It was recognition of the precision of her thought. The most valuable and most dangerous compliment she could receive from such a man. He'd noted her intelligence, her ability to see the essence, and there was something definitive in that recognition. Now he saw her as more than just a function or a casual interlocutor. He saw a potentially useful mind, and that changed everything. Yoon Byung-ji's answer echoed. A tense silence still hung in the studio, but something had changed for Ifia. The heavy, chilling fear that had gripped her chest since his arrival suddenly receded. It didn't vanish completely, but rather retreated to the far corner of her consciousness, giving way to a new, sharp, and almost dizzying feeling. Excitement. He called her question strategic. He recognized her intelligence, not just a presenter, but a thinker. For the first time in all her years on the job, her intellect was not a hindrance, not a source of ridicule behind her back, but a weapon, and a weapon that caught the eye of the most dangerous man in the city. She looks at him and now sees more than just a threat. She sees a companion, an adversary in a strange, quiet duel where the stakes are unclear, but the rules are suddenly clear. There's only one rule. Speak directly, think clearly, and don't look away. Her breathing evens out, her palms unclench beneath the table. She no longer feels like a ghost or a microphone on a stand. She feels like the center of this quiet, tense space where something real is happening. You speak of trust as part of the internal mechanics. She begins the next question, and her voice now sounds not just clear, but confident. It takes on a tone that wasn't there before, a tone of thought, not a memorized phrase. How then is this trust built? What is it based on in a system where, as you say, external rules are just a facade? She doesn't read from her tablet. She looks at him and expands on his thoughts. She engages in dialogue with him on his own terms, in the language of his logic. This is no longer an interview. It's an exchange, a test of the depth of understanding on both sides. Yoon Byung-ji begins to answer, once again laying out his philosophy with the measured precision of an engineer laying out a blueprint. Ifia listens, completely immersed, grasping the thread of his reasoning. Just then, out of the corner of her eye, she notices movement. To the right, from behind a rack of cables, a hand emerges. Clutched in its fingers is a folded piece of paper. The hand belongs to a young technician, the same one who usually whispers to the yawning girl. His face is pale, clearly acting on orders. He tries to discreetly slide the note onto the edge of the table, within Ifia's line of sight. She understands what's there. An order, from Leo Ji, from Minho. Change the subject immediately. Get back to the list. Enough! The management's panic has reached its limit, and they're trying to rudely intervene, disrupting the broadcast. Ifia ignores the hand. She continues to stare at the guest, pretending not to notice. But the technician persists. He pokes her elbow with the corner of the paper. Yoon Byung-ji doesn't interrupt his sentence, but his gaze, which had been fixed on Ifia, flickers for a split second toward the moving hand. He sees it. He sees an attempt at intervention, a panicked, unprofessional fuss. He finishes his thought, and instead of continuing or letting Ifia ask the next question, he pauses. He turns his head, not at the technician, but at Ifia. His eyes become even more inscrutable. Is something bothering you? He asks. His voice isn't loud. It's perfectly calm. But in this silence, it sounds like a gunshot. He's not asking the technician. He's asking her, directly, publicly. He's spotted a problem and is pointing it out, inviting her, as the host of this conversation, to sort it out. The technician, hearing the question, freezes like a rabbit before a boa constrictor. His hand holding the note freezes in midair, a few centimeters from Ifia. The color drains from his face. He doesn't dare move, doesn't dare remove his hand. He simply stares with empty, terrified eyes at Yoon Byung-ji, then at Ifia. Everyone in the studio looks at this frozen scene. The outstretched hand with the paper, the technician's pale face, the motionless figure of the guest and Ifia, who is between them. Ifia feels the current coursing through her veins again, but this time it's not fear. It's clarity, a moment of choice. She can take the note, acknowledging her superior's authority, severing the unique connection they've established. Or, she slowly turns her head and looks at the technician. Not with anger, not with malice. She looks at him with the same icy, distant gaze she'd just learned from her guest. A gaze that sees not a person, but an obstacle. No, she says clearly, addressing Yoon Byung-ji, but not taking her eyes off the technician. Nothing is in the way. Please continue. Her words are a death sentence. The technician, hearing them, jerks sharply, as if he's been electrocuted. He jerks his hand away, the crumpled note falling to the floor. He stumbles back into the darkness, disappearing behind the counters. Yoon Byung-ji doesn't smile. He simply nods slightly, a barely perceptible movement of his chin. A sign of approval, a sign that she's made the right choice. Go on, he tells her, taking the initiative back. But now the words ring differently. It's not just a suggestion, it's permission, a transfer of his power. He's made it clear that, within this dialogue, he's her shield from the rest of the world, including her superiors. It's just the two of them now, and they make the rules. Ifia takes a breath. The air feels cool and clean. She feels an incredible, unsettling freedom. She's no longer a TV station employee. She's a person talking to Yoon Byung-ji, and that's what he wants. After the technician vanishes into the darkness, something irreversible happens in the studio. It's not just silence. It's a shift in power. Everyone, from the cameraman to Leo G himself, now sees the situation in a new light. They saw their colleague, who dared to intervene, flee with an icy glare and a single question. But most importantly, they saw that Ifia refused their help. She refused the note. She publicly rejected their attempt at control and sided with the guest. And the guest approved of this. This moment erases all the old rules. No one looks at Ifia with a smirk anymore. No one whispers. All the glances that once slid over her with disdain are now cautious, almost wary. They look at the man Yoon has chosen, Byung-ji, whom he defended with just one question. They understand. Mocking her now would be mocking his choice, and no one would dare do that. Even the air seems different. The electric tension of fear remains, but its source has shifted. Now it emanates not only from the guest, but also from a new, unexpected figure at the center, Ifia, who suddenly has gained weight. She is no longer a victim of circumstance. She has become part of the power equation in this room. Ifia, taking the initiative, asks the next question. She touches on the topic of publicity. You rarely appear in the media, Mr. Yoon. What made you accept our invitation? He listens, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. It's the only sign of anything resembling thoughtfulness. You're right, I avoid interviews, he says, his voice sounding like he's reporting the weather. They're rarely more than an exchange of empty phrases. A waste of time. I'm usually not interested in what's being asked or the people asking the questions. He pauses, and his gaze grows heavier, more intense. But I was told something about you. Not about your ratings or awards. About your preparation. About how you read not just press releases, but also reports, and sometimes ask questions to which your superiors don't have approved answers. That struck me as unusual. Unusual enough to reconsider, to give it a chance. And as I see it, I was right. He doesn't say what they told him. He doesn't say who. But the very fact that they found out something about her, that it forced someone of his stature to change his ways, is staggering. He didn't come to see a program. He came to meet her because of her reputation. For the first time in her life, her tenacity, her meticulousness, for which she had been ridiculed, turned out not to be a flaw, but an asset. An asset noticed by the most influential man in town. His words hang in the air, full of meaning. Ifia feels a new wave of excitement, mixed with dizziness, rise. She catches her breath. The old list of questions is dead. She asks what she wants to know now in this moment. You mentioned trust as the foundation of internal mechanics, she says, her voice almost as even as his. But there's another word you used, respect. In your world, a world of serious matters and systems, what is respect? How is it earned? This is a direct question. Not about business, not about foundations, about his personal philosophy of power, about the very core. Yoon Byung-ji looks at her for a long moment, and then, for the first time all evening, his face changes. The corners of his lips slowly, almost imperceptibly, lift. It's not a warm smile. It's not a smile of joy. It's something else. Appreciation. acknowledgement of the audacity of the question, and something like pleasure at its accuracy. This smile doesn't make his face kind. It makes him seem human, but that doesn't make him any less, if anything, frightening. Because now his personality is visible. Strong, cunning, ruthless. Respect, he says the word with weight. It's not something you ask for. It's not begged for. It's not bought with money. Only fear or favors can buy that. Respect is power, a special kind of power. It can't be faked. You can only have it, or not have it. People sense it immediately, instinctively, like animals sense the alpha male in a pack. He pauses briefly, letting this sink in. How do you earn it? In two ways. The first is through impeccability. When your every word is law, your every action is complete, and your power is undeniable. This is respect from a distance. It's felt for a thunderstorm, a hurricane. The second way, his gaze bores into hers. It's the recognition of power in another, even if that power is still hidden, even if it's in its infancy. It's respect for potential, for the right breed. It's felt for a sharp blade, still in its sheath. The knowledge that this blade can cut makes it a respected object, even if it's never drawn. He's talking about himself, about the first method, and he's talking about her, about the second. He sees in her sharpness, potential, the right breed. He's not flattering, he's classifying. And in his classification, she finds herself in the category of things deserving of respect. Maybe for now, like a tool in a sheath, but no longer as empty space, not as background noise. Ifia listens, her own blood pounding in her temples in time with his words. She's no longer afraid. She's trapped in his logic, his worldview. And this trap is strangely liberating, because in his world, a world of power and respect, there's finally a place for her. After his words of respect, a final pause ensues in the studio. Ifia realizes that all the questions that made sense have already been asked. Everything that could have been said has been said. Any further question from the old list would be a step back, a return to falsehood. She doesn't want that. And it seems he doesn't either. She glances at the clock displayed on the small monitor at her feet. Time is running out. She takes a final breath and delivers the program's prepared final words. But now they sound different. Mr. Yoon, our time has come to an end. Thank you very much for this conversation. She pauses slightly on the word conversation. This wasn't just a broadcast. It was something more. He waits for her to finish her short speech. Then, while the camera is still rolling, he turns to her, not to the lens, to her. Thank you, he says. His voice is quiet but powerful. He doesn't say thank you to the program. He doesn't say thank you to the channel. He says you, personally. The conversation was informative. You lived up to expectations. Met expectations. Coming from him, that sounds like the highest praise. It means she passed the test. She didn't just conduct the interview. She conducted it at the level he deemed worthy. The red light on the camera finally goes out. The lighting in the studio changes, becoming more subdued, more work-like. The program is over. Yoon Byung-ji is in no hurry. He doesn't look around, doesn't search for the director or the producer. He's focused solely on completing the ritual. He rises smoothly from his chair, his movements still economical and unfussy. He adjusts the cuff of his jacket with one hand. Then he turns to Ifia, who has also stood. Their eyes meet across the table. He looks at her directly, without a smile, but also without the previous icy detachment. His gaze now has a finality of assessment. He tilts his head forward slightly, just a couple of centimeters. It's not a bow, it's a nod, but not a simple, friendly one. This nod is slow, deliberate, full of meaning. It's a gesture of acknowledgement of an equal, or rather, of someone who has proven worthy of conversation. It's a commander's farewell to a worthy adversary after a battle in which there were no winners or losers, only clarity. He holds that gaze for a second, nodding. It's enough for the studio to freeze again, watching this silent dialogue. Then he breaks eye contact and turns toward the exit. As Yoon Byung-ji moves toward the door, his men begin to move. The guards take up positions. One of them, not the one staring at the technician, but the other, in a more expensive suit and with the watchful expression of an assistant, pauses for a moment. He approaches not Ifia, but her desk. His hands were hidden, but now he makes one swift, practiced movement. His palm opens briefly above the desk surface, next to her forgotten tablet. When he removes his hand, a small rectangle of thick, matte paper remains on the table. A business card. There's no company name on it. No name, no job title, No embellishments or logos, just a row of laser-etched numbers. A phone number, nothing else. The assistant doesn't look at Ifia. He doesn't say a word. He simply turns and silently follows his boss, who is already leaving the studio without so much as a backward glance. Ifia stands at her desk, staring at a white card. She hesitates to take it. The noise in the studio slowly begins to return. Sighs of relief, timid whispers, the creaking of chairs. But all this is happening somewhere far away, in the background. She extends her hand. She takes the card. The paper is thick, pleasant to the touch. The numbers feel slightly raised under her fingertip. It's not an invitation. It's not a promise. It's an opportunity, a key, left intentionally, but without comment. Whether to use it or not is her choice. But the very fact that it's left speaks volumes. He thinks she might have a reason to call, or that he might have an offer for her. She turns the card over. The back is completely blank, just white. She places it in her palm and squeezes her fingers. The edges of the card dig slightly into her skin. This feeling is real. This is not a dream. She looks up. The door to the corridor is already closed. He and his men are gone. But their presence, their power, and that strange new territory that opened up to her during the conversation, all of it remains in the air. And it lies in her hand like a piece of matte paper. The door to the corridor closes behind the last guard. The click of the lock sounds unusually loud in the complete silence. Then, absolute silence. No one moves. No one speaks. Everyone is frozen in their places, as if after a powerful blow that has deafened and robbed them of their ability to speak. Ifia stands at her desk. All she can hear is her own breathing and a light, almost weightless click. The click of the hard edge of a business card against her fingernail as she turns it over in her fingers. This quiet sound seems the only real one in a frozen world. She looks at the empty chair opposite. There's no one there, but the space seems to still retain its shape, its pressure. The air is heavy, charged with adrenaline and fear that hasn't yet evaporated. She slowly sinks back into her seat. A strange weakness washes over her legs. Only now, when it's all over, does her body dare to react. Her hands tremble slightly. She places the card on the table in front of her, carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She simply looks at it, at these numbers. It's her only point of support in this sudden vacuum. The noise returns gradually. First, the hum of the ventilation system, which had always been there but had gone unnoticed. Then, someone's nervous cough. The creaking of a floorboard. Approaches Ifia. He moves slowly, carefully, as if on thin ice. His face is still gray, but the panic is gone. There is a deep, almost animal-like weariness and confusion. He stops next to her, but doesn't sit. He doesn't clap her on the shoulder, as he sometimes did after complex broadcasts. He simply stands, his arms hanging limply at his sides. "Ifia!" he begins, his voice hoarse and broken. He trails off, as if unsure of what to say next. Then he exhales. "Did everything go okay?" He doesn't ask, "How are you?" He doesn't say, "Good job," or "What was that?" He asks, "Did everything go well?" His tone is that of a subordinate reporting to a superior, or someone trying to assess the scale of a disaster and determine whether the danger has passed. There's none of his usual self-assurance in this question. There's only uncertainty and perhaps a hint of new respect. He looks not at her, but slightly over her shoulder, at the empty chair, as if asking him too. Ifia slowly looks up at him. Her own voice sounds foreign to her as she answers. "Yes, Leo G. Everything went well. The broadcast is over." She says it evenly, without emotion. It's simply a statement of fact. She doesn't smile. She doesn't try to reassure him. She acts as if nothing out of the ordinary has happened, as if conducting this interview is her usual job. Leo G nods quickly, several times. Yes. Yes, of course. Finished. Okay. He doesn't know what to do next. He takes a step back, looking around the studio as if seeing it for the first time. "Well, okay. You're dismissed. Everyone's dismissed." He pronounces this command quietly, but in the silence, everyone can hear it. People begin to stir, slowly, reluctantly. Technicians gather up cables. An assistant turns off monitors, but they do so silently with concentration. No talking, no giggling. Ifia feels eyes on her. So many eyes, but they're different now. Before they were mocking, appraising, condescending. Now they're quick, fleeting, cautious. She raises her head and looks straight at the yawning technician. The technician, meeting her gaze, immediately lowers her eyes and blushes. She turns sharply and practically runs for the exit, tripping over a cable. Ifia glances at the group of lighting technicians who had been whispering about her jacket. They immediately fall silent and pretend to be terribly busy checking their equipment. One of them, the youngest, even straightens his back when she looks in his direction. Her department head, Minho, stands a distance away near the exit. He doesn't approach. He simply looks at her from afar, his face a mask of fear and a new, unfamiliar calculation. He's trying to understand what this means for him, for his department, for him personally. He clearly wants to say something, to approach, but he hesitates. The power now emanating from Ifia is as palpable and dangerous for him as it was from the guest himself. It has become part of that equation he can't solve. Ifia doesn't take a single step toward him. She doesn't say a word. She simply gathers her things. She puts her tablet in her bag. She picks up a business card from the table and briefly considers where to put it. In her pocket? In her wallet? She carefully, so as not to wrinkle it, places it in the smallest separate pocket inside her bag, the one where nothing else usually lives. Then she stands. She straightens her jacket, the one with the pattern. She walks toward the exit, and people silently part for her. No one says bye. No one says see you tomorrow. They simply make way for her. Their silence is a new language. The language of respect mixed with fear. The language of recognition that a new, inexplicable, but very real force has appeared in their hierarchy. And its name is Ifia. Ifia comes home. Her apartment is quiet, familiar. Everything is in its place, but everything feels foreign, as if she's returned from a long and dangerous journey. She turns on the light in the hallway, sets her bag on the floor, and slowly takes off her jacket. That very jacket. She hangs it over the back of a chair, staring at the dark fabric with its geometric pattern for a long moment. Today, the pattern wasn't a bold statement. It was simply a detail that was noticed, and that was enough. She feels a dull, pent-up weariness. Not physical, but something else entirely. Weariness from hours of constant tension. Weariness from having to keep a straight face while her insides are churning. She makes tea, moving mechanically around the kitchen. Her thoughts return to every moment of the broadcast, to his gaze, to his words, to the business card that's now in her bag. She sits on a kitchen chair, holding a mug, but doesn't drink. She simply stares out the dark window, where the city lights reflect. She reflects on what has changed. Nothing and everything. She has a card, she has experience. But what next? Call? Why on earth? What can she say to the man who owns the entire city? Thanks for the interview? That would sound ridiculous. Her thoughts are interrupted by a brief, quiet vibration. The ringing is quiet, but in the complete silence of the kitchen, it seems loud. The phone is lying on the table next to her bag. Ifia slowly lowers her mug. She doesn't expect calls this evening after the broadcast. None of her colleagues will call. She has no friends who would understand that today was special. She reaches for her phone, and her fingers hover for a second over the screen. On the screen, there is a notification, SMS, unknown number. Her heart stops for a moment, then starts beating faster, but without panic. With cold, clear clarity, she clicks on the message. The text is short, just 3 words in Russian, but the caption is in Latin letters. The interview was impressive. UB. She reads these words. Then again, she doesn't move. Her breathing is even, but her mind is racing. Impressive. Not good. Not interesting. Impressive. Meaning leaving an impression. A strong word. A word that conveys weight, meaning, and the signature. YB initials. There was no need to sign. She already knows the number. It's from the card. But he signed. Is this a formality or another gesture? A gesture that transforms an anonymous message into a personal appeal. A direct, albeit distant, continuation of the conversation. He thought about her. After the broadcast, he found her personal number, which, incidentally, probably wasn't difficult for him. And he felt it necessary to send this message. Not through an assistant. Not just leave a card, but send it in person. What is this? Politeness? A game? Testing her reaction? Ifia doesn't answer. She simply saves the number to her phone. In the name field, she enters 2 letters. YB. She looks at the saved contact. It's no longer just an unknown number. It's personalized. It exists in her space. She puts her phone down, drinks her tea. It's already cold. She looks out the window. There's no fear in her head. There's a strange, icy clarity. The door, the existence of which she never even suspected, is now not just ajar. A hand is extended toward it, not pulled by the hand, simply shown that the door exists, and that those on the other end know of its existence. She goes to bed, but doesn't fall asleep right away. Two things are in front of her eyes: a white card on the table and 3 words on her phone screen. She doesn't make plans. She doesn't fantasize. She simply records the facts. The facts of a new reality. She wakes up early in the morning. The sun is just rising. She feels rested, but not relaxed. Focused, like an athlete before an important competition, the outcome of which is uncertain, but for which she is prepared. She chooses her clothes. No patterned jacket today. Today she wears a crisp, perfectly tailored dark gray suit. No embellishments whatsoever. Simple, elegant, impeccable. It doesn't shout, doesn't try to prove anything. It simply speaks of professionalism and strength. She styles her hair a little more sternly than usual. Her makeup is the same impeccable disguise. But today, she doesn't hide her fatigue. She emphasizes the clarity of her lines, the composure of her gaze. She eats breakfast and checks her email. No messages from colleagues about yesterday. Silence. She puts her tablet, wallet, and keys in her bag. And, after a moment's thought, she takes a business card from an inside pocket. She doesn't put it back in her bag. She transfers it to the thin, hard case she carries with her for her security pass. The card sits next to her security pass for the TV station building. 2 cards, 2 forms of identification, the official one and the real one. She leaves the house. Her gait has always been even, but today her back is absolutely straight. Her shoulders are back. She doesn't slouch, doesn't try to make herself smaller. She takes up all the space she's entitled to. She walks down the street, and people unconsciously part slightly for her, even though she's not looking at anyone. She enters the TV station building. The security guard at the entrance, who usually nods absent-mindedly, looks at her a little more closely today, lingering his gaze a little longer. Perhaps he's been told something too. Perhaps he simply senses a change. She walks through the hallways. Usually, there's a morning bustle, shouts, laughter, discussions of yesterday's broadcasts. Today, the sounds are muted. When she appears in the doorway of the common area, the conversations die down for a few seconds. Not completely, not like yesterday in the studio, but noticeably. Then they resume, but without the reckless volume. Quick, fleeting glances are cast at her. No one looks directly. No one smiles at her in greeting. Ifia doesn't look for anyone's eyes. She walks straight to the studio. She feels those gazes on her back. They no longer prick or humiliate. They tickle, but in a different way, with respect, with fear, with curiosity. The studio is preparing for the morning broadcast of another program. Technicians are fiddling with their equipment. Seeing her, they pause for a second, then nod, too immersed in their work. The assistant, the same one who had been yawning, stands at the counter. Their eyes meet. The assistant tries to smile at first, but it comes out crooked and frightened. She quickly looks away and pretends to search through her papers. Ifia walks to her dressing room. On the way, she runs into Leo G. He's discussing something with the editor. Seeing her, he interrupts mid-sentence. "Ifia, good morning," he says, his voice carrying an unfamiliar, almost formal politeness. "No introductions today. Free day. Relax." He doesn't ask how she is. He doesn't discuss yesterday. He simply states a fact. He addresses her informally, but his tone is no longer familiar. It's almost respectful. "Thank you," she says simply, and walks past without slowing down. She enters the dressing room, closes the door. Silence. She puts down her bag, looks at her reflection in the mirror. A woman in a formal suit. Her face is calm. Her eyes look straight ahead, without apologetic softness, but also without aggression. Just looking. She no longer smiles without reason. That false, workaday smile she'd worn for years like a shield is no longer necessary. The shield has become her skin. Her face is now her face, not the mask of a presenter, but the face of a woman who's dueled the most dangerous man in the city and emerged from it as someone unknown, but certainly not defeated. She sits down. She doesn't turn on the computer. She just sits and stares ahead. She's not thinking about yesterday's broadcast. She's thinking about today and about tomorrow. She takes the pass case out of her bag. She opens it. There's a plastic card with her smiling photo on it. Next to it is a matte white card with numbers. She runs her finger over the raised numbers. They don't promise anything. They just are. She closes the case and puts it back in her bag. She stands up. She goes to the window. The city below is bustling with life. The same city whose rules she'd just been shown. And shown that she had a chance, if not to change them, then at least to understand them. She turns and walks out of the dressing room. She walks back down the hallway. People fall silent again at her appearance, but now she barely notices it. She looks ahead. She knows she will never be the same Ifia again, the one they laugh at, the one they ignore. That Ifia is a thing of the past. Yesterday, at 9 p.m. Today, a new day has begun. And it doesn't have a name yet, but it will definitely be different. She feels it with every cell of her straight, rigid spine. She walks, and her steps echo in the silent hallway with a clear, firm thud. It is the sound of a new reality, a sound that now belongs to her.